We speak much of truth, and there's relative truth and absolute truth. Where is the line? Is it a sliding scale? And if so, how does that accord with the general idea of truth?
What is relative truth exactly?
Contingent truth.
It's almost true, or
No, it's true within its realm. Sheikh Isa wrote about that, I think.
Yes, he had a term he called the absolute and the relatively absolute.
Yeah, exactly. And my feeling is that the line between them is how far you can see. One is one way to put it, but absolute truth, there's nothing to say about.
I'm just not really familiar with that expression, relative truth. What did you have in mind, Seda?
There are things that are absolutely, completely true, but sometimes the things that are absolutely true, we experience them as false. So for instance, if you want the absolute truth of a table, it's not a table. It's an amalgam of various electrons and neutrons and various other subatomic particles.
That's right. But it wouldn't be a lie to say it's a table.
No.
Exactly, and that's a relative truth.
Most facts are, well, all facts are relative truths because they express the truth about something, and anything that is something isn't the absolute.
Just like a lot of religions have a lot of falsehoods in them, but they also have a lot of truths. But the problem comes when a lot of people tend to say they're an absolute truth, and then you have exclusivism, where in reality, most of the stuff in exoteric religions, or even to a certain extent esoteric religions, is really just relative truth.
Yeah. It's the rungs on the ladder.
Right. A lot of it also comes down to subjective experience. So when Maximus of Tyre said there's one God, but there are many gods, he was expressing an absolute truth through the lens of subjective truths. And honestly, we've never gotten farther than that, because unfortunately, each little cult tends to say, oh, my cult is absolutely true, my cult is absolutely true. But everything's projected through, that little piece of meat in the cranium. And, once that happens, and electric signals go bouncing around between the ears, one person says God, another says gods, another says something else, and all of it is really just some sort of grasping at that which is real. And basically, as soon as you can touch that which is real, you're burnt alive.
Yeah.
So ultimately,
you're burnt into true life.
Right, exactly. But even for those greatest of mystics who may have touched the real, capital R, as soon as they try to project it into the realm of language, it's relative.
Right, exactly. So there's everything except the absolute is relative, and there isn't a clear line, but it's clear that there's a pole of where a vanishing point of truth and an absolute truth. So I see it, relative truth is everything before you reach absolute truth.
So say Bahia, we are on question one about the difference between relative truth and
the other kind.
I was thinking of Seda Badria maybe referred us to this book by your favorite author, Lawrence, about the man who died, or it had another title, but I read the first part of it. It's a 2-part short book, but it describes basically the Jesus died on the cross, or it was appeared to, and then he was buried. And then after a day or so, he woke up in excruciating pain and sort of recovered enough to somehow push the stone aside and come out. And then it starts describing, what he did after that. And it makes it fairly, this sort of thing could happen. I saw a story in the reference to a story about some woman who was buried in and put in a casket, and she started banging on the top of it because she looked to be dead, but it turns out she wasn't. So it is, this question about the Christians say Jesus died on the cross and was resurrected. Jews and Muslims say, well, no, he appeared to die, but he didn't really die. And so this story by Lawrence shows how both of those stories could be true, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
He all but died, but then I think his comment at the very beginning of the story was, they thought I was dead, but they took me down too soon.
There was a fear that people had at a time before medicine was capable of determining whether someone was dead or not, of being buried alive.
Yes. Poe, Edgar Allan Poe wrote a short story just about that exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
There's an interesting short novel by the poet H.D. Hilda Doolittle called Pilate's Wife. And it's talking, the novel's from the perspective of the wife of Pontius Pilate. And basically, she befriends Jesus, and then the whole story is that essentially she goes to some priestess of Isis who comes up with some herbal concoction to make it look like he died, but basically she rescues him. He dies, they supposedly, but they revive him after the potion wears off, and then they sent him out somewhere into the world, away from Judea.
He wasn't safe there.
No.
Story about Prokofiev, he who wrote the thing that was based on Shakespeare's play of the lady who died and the man who died.
Romeo and Juliet?
Romeo and Juliet, yes. Yeah. And but at any rate, Prokofiev, after he finished writing the ballet, decided he would rewrite it so that they didn't die. They were only thought to be dead, but then they awakened later. And but unfortunately, all of his critics got a hold of him before he could accomplish that, and dissuaded him from messing around with one of Shakespeare's plays.
Well, that was before they made Forbidden Planet.
Indeed.
Yeah, that restriction is gone.
Yes.
All right, Zeta Badria, you have anything more to say about that?
Just that those who tend to be representatives of truth in the world we live in today tend to be either neglected, rejected, viewed as crazy, or something otherwise. Ezra Pounds, they forced him to spend 12 years in St. Mary's Psychiatric Institute outside of Washington, D.C., despite the fact that everyone knew he was completely sane, because essentially he was too sane. He was telling the truth too well. He wrote an entire decade of his cantos called the Adams Cantos, where he combined, 25 volumes of the writings of John Adams down into 11 luminous poems. And it essentially saying, the nation has been betrayed by, the party of Hamilton, and, gone away from the original, idea of people like Jefferson and Adams. that essentially democracy has been betrayed, because you can't have a democracy where the banks and finance is determining things. That essentially credit should be, in the hands of the people or the government, not in the hands of the banks. But that was too much for the powers that be. And even on secular matters like that, people don't often want to hear the absolute truth of the matter, let alone on things like religion. I mean, it's funny, because you would think we're becoming more and more and more enlightened, but you actually
Yeah.
you have to go back far into the past to actually see that it's the most ancient peoples who actually had the idea of an acceptance of all sorts of different ideas of religion, the gods, God, whatever. It didn't matter. Ultimately, of course, there were people that had wacky beliefs, but no one really cared as long as one acted ethically towards their fellows and one performed some sort of practices. Practice was viewed as much more important. Do you pour out a bit of wine to Dionysus? Do you, burn a little bit of wheat on the altar of Demeter? It doesn't matter which deity you're worshiping. What matters is that, you live rightly. And now we've inverted that. So everything's like, we have the right belief, we have the right political belief, the right economic belief, the right religious belief, the right. But yet they turn around and are dastardly human beings who can't even treat their neighbors with respect.
Well,
Absolute is a word that should be used carefully, even more so than always and never.
Right.
Well, the traditional forms are, you might say, good and are perceptible by the majorities of humankind, or by humankind. And they are the guiding messages, like, for instance, the Christian tradition or the Islamic tradition, and the guiding messages of a people who cannot understand beyond that formal level.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the question I'd like to ask is, why is that true of the three Western monotheisms?
It is true of it.
Yes, but it is not true of the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Tao. There's something about the Western monotheisms that makes them intolerant to other forms. Why is that?
They have no idea what the absolute is and think they've got it, and it does.
If you read about the great upheavals in the Far East, you find that they were not very tolerant either. The different forms of tradition that were current, say for instance, that were coexisted in China, which consisted of Buddhism and Taoism, and Confucianism, were not mutually tolerant of each other in many respects.
But the difference there is that they weren't mutually tolerant because of actions and because of ethics. And the Confucians and Taoists didn't dislike each other because they're different views of the metaphysical ideas, but because of their different views on ethics.
Well, it was also just their different levels of viewpoint. If you take,
sure. It always is.
It was basically, that was the level of the bureaucrat, autocratic government, from the emperor on down to the army. And those people were expected to be Confucian in their viewpoint. this was not the same as the Buddhists that existed there, and it was not the same as the Taoists.
No.
Yes, and so they had, the Buddhist, I would think, would be kind of at a plateau level between Confucianism and Taoism, and then Taoism was the most esoteric of the three, I think.
Yeah,
But
it seems that way.
it seems that way because of the way it's been presented to us in the West. That's actually, it's not the case. The case is that there's esoteric Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. But that's sort of besides the point. The point is that the Hindus, Buddhists, Taoists, Confucians, ancient Greeks, Etruscans, Egyptians, so on and so forth, had room for different ideas of metaphysics, different ideas of what the divine may or may not be, and they were open to accepting that. Whereas Western monotheism basically has developed from the twin pillars of the Persian sun god, with the king being the representative of that god, and the Judaic concept of this angry, jealous god who would have people killed for farting in the wrong way.
Yeah, a God who is king or king of kings. That is the Persian model, after all.
Yes.
And all three Western monotheisms are in the wake of that model.
Yeah. Well, I think, honestly, if everybody knew what absolute truth is, we wouldn't have any fighting.
Yes, I think you're right.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
I guess when you talk about absolute truth, you're talking about something which can't be expressed.
Yes, that's right.
We're all quick to recognize that, I think.
Yes, it might be experienced, but not expressed.
Yes, exactly.
Very good. That's exactly.
When you go to expressing these things, you drop automatically down to the discursive thinking mode.
That's right.
Which is beneath what you are trying to talk about.
Yes, and you impose language and logic on the absolute.
Yeah, exactly. You have to put it in a box in order to present it to somebody, and then it's limited, no longer absolute.
Some of the things that you find in Christianity, like for instance the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, are expressed in ways that are not really perceptible directly by most people.
Yeah,
they're believed in a more or less dogmatic fashion, and it is true that you can rise to the level, I think, where you perceive the actual truths that are being enunciated, but most people don't.
Yeah, they don't. And they believe in the words Father, Son, and Holy Ghost as an article of faith.
And they'll insist that you do too.
Yeah, exactly. But they don't know what it, they don't have real knowledge of it. They just have learned the doctrine, the words of the doctrine.
Yes, you learn it as you memorize the creed in the sermon.
Exactly.
So, I mean, nobody can explain the Trinity. That doesn't make it, false.
Right.
But
well, I think it can be experienced, just as we were saying that the other things of the higher level can be experienced, but you can't necessarily, in discursive thought, make it understandable.
yeah, well, I have a funny feeling that the Trinity is a relative absolute in the sense that it may well describe how everything how everything happens. That process that happens between and among the three. I have a funny feeling that it's, after all, they're person, it's living, it's never really the same, but it's always the same. So I like the Trinity. I don't
Yes.
think I'll ever.
A lot of correspondence to the three. What is it? The Hindu is Sat Chit Ananda.
Right?
Yeah.
In that Sat is like pure being. Chit is like union between, and then Ananda is bliss.
Right.
Is the bliss of that union. And so you could say that would be like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, it is a Trinity. I don't think the relationships are experienced quite the same way, but I think, but they're both true.
Well, in fact, they actually correspond very closely.
Closely,
in,
yeah.
In a way, yeah. The three elements of the one can be understood in the same respect as the three elements of the Christian tradition.
Right. Well, there's also an interpretation of it as being the three fundamental laws, basically active, passive, and reconciling. And there's something in one of the Eastern churches which actually hints at that, but it's it's a way that they express the thrice holy hymn, but it's anyway.
Yeah, Christian hymn, isn't it? The thrice holy hymn.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's a wording of it that opens up to the active, passive, and reconciling.
Yeah, and even in ancient Greek thought, in various ways, also in ancient Hindu thought, far before Shankara, both of those traditions had a very strong idea of, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So it does put forth a truth. I'm sure that it's not the absolute truth as viewed by the absolute, but then that's getting into another question. What really is the absolute truth? Maybe it's something that we cannot even comprehend because we're not absolute. So only the absolute can actually understand absolute truth, because only from the perspective of the absolute can it be truly objective and not subjective. It's really the synthesis of the entirety of subjectivity and objectivity melded into one synthesis.
Yeah, if it's absolute, then, there's nothing higher than it. There's nothing simpler than it. There's nothing purer than it.
It includes all possibility and a synthesis of all possibility, and some of that possibility is not manifestable because it is beyond being, but it is possible. It's possible to, you might say, to experience it or realize it. So a good example of that would be silence. Silence is not expressible precisely because it's silence.
But it is experienceable.
But nevertheless, it is the principle of all possible expressions.
And it is purely and simply experienceable.
Right. Just like being is the principle of all possible manifestations of Maya, but it itself, being pure, the source of it, is not manifestable It is, you might say, that first step below beyond being.
Sure. Being is what makes it possible for something to be manifest.
Yes.
You know, only by participation in being can something exist. And it illusorily appears to be apart from being.
And you know, I like Heidegger. Heidegger talks a lot about being. I think he's on the right track with a lot of things, but I also think that, you know, sometimes there's more truth in a 20-line poem that gets to the heart of being than there are in 20 volumes of philosophy.
Thank you.
Well, especially if that philosophy is more or less couched in discursive language, the language of human beings.
Yeah, but you know, we're talking experiential here when we're talking about these things that we speculate about and assign terms to and try to create some causality between them and all of that. It is beyond expression. And you can experience it. You can be the experiencer of it, or you can be the experience, or you can be it. It's almost the same.
Yes, you might say that what is left to you is consciousness of it.
Yes, and of course, consciousness, you're not the source of the consciousness. Consciousness is, you know, consciousness is.
Shall we go on to one more? We've got
yes.
some time left. It's this one.
Let me ask you if you wanted those poems you asked for.
Oh yes, you were going to read us some of your that Blake poem or poems.
Asked me to find. I had given you a synopsis of a poem that I'd read by Blake, and you wanted me to bring a copy of it, so I did.
So how long is it to read?
It's about, let's see, it looks like about 16 lines.
We can handle that.
Four, and four. Okay, and the name of the poem is The Garden of Love.
Oh,
Nice.
And it starts, I went to the Garden of Love and saw what I never had seen. A chapel was built in the midst, where I used to play on the green. Now, the green is always used as an expression of the innocence of things, whereas this poem is a poem that's taken to express
Excuse me. Could we have the poem and then the interpretation?
Oh yes, right. And the gates of the chapel were shut, and thou shalt not was writ over the door. So I turned to the garden of love that so many sweet flowers bore, and I saw it was filled with graves. The tombstones were flowers where flowers should be. The priests in black gowns were walking their rounds and binding with briars my joys and desires.
ooh. Wow.
That's anti-clerical.
Yeah.
And there's a place for that, of course.
And it caused me to read a documentary of Oliver Cromwell. And he was the beginning of a lot of revolutions in England.
Yes.
And he attacked was at war with the Catholics of Ireland.
Oh.
And there were a lot of executions and things like that. And King Charles, who was the son of Queen Elizabeth I, his tongue was removed or damaged to where he couldn't speak for himself in defending himself. And then he was, I guess you might say, killed.
So you're talking about this happening to Cromwell?
This was during Cromwell's power.
But whose tongue was taken?
King Charles.
Oh, the king. All right. All right.
Charles the First. And
Oh
he
my
was
goodness.
he was Catholic, but he was English, of course. And then after him came King Charles II, who defeated the Puritans under Cromwell, who were in control of Parliament. And Cromwell was hung in a cage or something and allowed to rot in the open air for some period of time. And this was Charles II.
They had a
Then,
real aesthetic sense back then.
now then, we have a new king of England, who is the son of Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes.
He has taken the name Charles.
Yeah, cool, isn't it?
It's kind of interesting. I thought that was.
Do we have a current Cromwell?
Well, it kind of makes one wonder if there's going to be considerable upheaval in the Great Britain, because Charles may identify with the previous two Charleses, even in terms of religion. Now then, so that, and even though he is the titular head, I think, of the Anglican Church.
Right.
It's interesting. So I just thought that was kind of, and England went through a considerable amount of turmoil.
Sure did.
From the time of Cromwell onward. And I think William Blake, even though he didn't live in the period that a lot of that happened, he was quite familiar with it. And I understand his allegiance was to some extent with the royalty. And
William Blake? No, absolutely not.
he was a Puritan, but nevertheless, he supported the authority of the, I guess you would say, the
Monarchy.
No, William Blake was strongly for the French and American revolutions. He was strongly anti-monarchy.
He was an admirer of certain aspects of it, yes.
Well,
And there's another poem, but I don't know whether you want to go to the trouble to read that. One, it's about 16 lines long, or no, it's about 6 times 4 is 24 lines long, and it deals with this same subject. And he was very anti-Anglican, I think, and of course Cromwell was.
Boy, he's probably very anti-church, state religion.
He, was an amalgam of mystical Protestant of Yucca Burma, the kind of, celestial mysticism of Swedenborg, and then radically antinomian Luddite kind of DIY Christianity of the ranters, diggers, and levelers. So very much anti-authority, anti-royalty, and anti-priests and whatnot, anti-clergy.
Well, let's hear the next poem, and then we'll judge for ourselves.
You want me to read this?
I would.
Yes,
All right.
please.
The poem is A Little Boy Lost. And it starts, naught loves another as itself, nor venerates another so, nor is it possible to thought a greater than itself to know. And Father, how can I love you or any of my brothers more? I love you like the little bird that picks up crumbs around the door. The priest sat by and heard the child. In trembling zeal it seized his hair. He led him by his little coat, and all admired the priestly care. And standing on the altar high, lo, that a fiend is here, said he, one who must reason up for judge of our most holy mystery. The weeping child could not be heard. The weeping parents wept in vain. They stripped him of his little shirt and bound him in an iron chain and burned him in a holy place where many had been burned before, and weeping parents wept in vain. Are such things done in Albion's shore? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, well,
Little boy lost.
Yes. And that was, you might say, it was, a lot of his poems are of this particular, are kind of a juxtaposition of the two things.
yeah.
Right.
The simple understanding of the truth attacked by the sterile, rigid understanding or misunderstanding.
Well, and it can be, to some extent, the setting side by side the more esoteric viewpoint and the more exoteric.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yes.
The boy is the esoteric, and the formal religion has no place for it.
Right.
Well,
so even in Islam, say an al-Hallaj, who was assassinated for what he said,
Yeah.
in his heart, he was expressing an esoteric viewpoint
Yeah.
that ran
Yes.
into conflict with an exoteric one.
well, and we've all pretty much collectively forgotten that, and I think religions have gone completely in the wrong direction, as they should. And there's this bit of doggerel that Lawrence wrote that I think is fantastic. It's called The Church, and he said, if I was a member of the Church of Rome, I should advocate reform, the marriage of priests, the priests to wear rose color or magenta in the streets, to teach the resurrection in the flesh, to start the year on Easter Sunday, to add the mystery of joy in resurrection to the Mass, and to inculcate the new conception of the risen man.
Well, yeah.
I mean, just those simple things were done, I think there would be more relevance to the church, unlike now.
Yes, I agree.
Well, yes, one doesn't know exactly what the result would be.
Well, I don't think the church would be harmed if it let go of celibacy of the priesthood. After all, it allows the priest to actually be, a human being rather than, anyway, yeah.
Not to mention, think about it, a priest walking down the street all in bright red, that says something, Priests don't have to be attired like Johnny Cash.
Dressed in red sounds sort of like the College of Cardinals.
Yeah. Of course, then, the Protestants came along and wanted everybody to dress drably.
Buddhist monks wear red or brightly colored robes. And
Yeah, it's a yellowish
They have red suits.
ochre.
Right after that one on the Roman Church, Lawrence wrote the short poem on the Protestant churches. He said, the Protestant churches have had their day and served their great purpose. They knew the useful Godhead of providence, but now we have to go back to the creative Godhead, which overshadows the other and which we have lost.
Yeah. Yeah, the Protestants threw, an important baby out with the bathwater.
And there were certain aspects of the Protestant Revolution which were beneficial.
Yes.
I mean, that there wouldn't be a Blake without Protestants, but then the entirety basically of modern American Christianity is basically founded on a perverse amalgam of deism, Cartesian dualism, and Calvinism, and that's a sick and twisted amalgamation if there ever was one.
Well, Calvinist influences really, I think, what has destroyed it from within.
Yes, and the idea of the deistic God that just basically creates the world and then sits back on a lounge chair watching things as they're happening, that's not good either. There needs to be an idea of a creative flux in the heart of the universe.
Yeah, that absolute, or that absolute and imminent thing has always been a problem.
I was remembering one day, in 1983, I made this trip to Europe and spent several days in Geneva, and then there was a weekend, and I was traveling with a friend and companion, but he went off on Sunday morning to see some friend of his up north of Geneva, and I passed. But I remember I went in the morning, I went to the big church in Geneva where Calvin preached, and at the time I was Presbyterian, so I had sort of a connection there. But and then later that after the church service, I got on a train and went to Lausanne, and then finally to Pouilly, and to the house where anyway Whittle Perry used to live. But that was an interesting day in terms of my religious quest.
Now, who was that was the guest?
Who was the guest? What was the question again?
I think you said that was our guest for the day, or did I misunderstand you?
Oh, it was just an interesting day on my religious quest, my religious journey. So going to where Calvin preached, and then hunting. I was hunting for Sheikh Isa, but I didn't. Yeah. It was 1983, and they said, well, he doesn't live here anymore. But anyway.
Well, the church in Pouilly, I think that's where it was, or maybe some other part of Lausanne, is the one with the where the Protestants went through and tried to break all the windows, but they couldn't reach the rose windows, so that remained.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good symbolism of Protestantism.
When I got back from Pouilly, I just took a bus out there and got back to Lausanne, I did go up into that largest cathedral and went up to a very high point, and you had this fantastic view across the lake to the Mont Blanc, or that mountain range over there. It's one of the most beautiful views I've seen in the world. Looking up and down the lake.
Yeah.
Across to the mountains.
That's Lake Geneva.
Yes, they call it Lac Léman there, but we call it Geneva. Well, you've all seen it, I guess, or some of us.
Right.
Now, most of the time I was there, this course I was there in the winter. But most of the time I was there, you couldn't see the mountains on the other side of the lake. But one morning we got up and, everything was transformed. You could see across the lake. Yeah,
I was there in late September. Beautiful view, clear day.
I think it was November when I was there. But anyway, yeah.
So Larry, you and Terry didn't go together?
No.
Oh.
We went pretty close to, the same time, but not exactly.
Yes, I think that little town of Pouilly was there on the coast of that lake, and you could take a ferry across to the other side.
Right.
Wait a minute. How did we get here from esotericism, exotericism?
Beats me.
I've forgotten. I don't know.
I was supposed to ask another question 20 minutes ago, and then all of a sudden we went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, well, it happens.
Well, we had a poem. We had two poems in there.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, that was a treat, really.
Well, we'll have to pick up with number 2 next time.
Well, we had a third poem. There was one by Lawrence, 2 by Blake. All right, so next time is Thursday.
I cannot make it on Thursday. I'm committed to something else.
Well, it's always nice to have a commitment of some kind.
Yes, that's right. Well, life is full of good commitments.
By the way, did we get
Like
a
good intentions.
did I miss the story on Gold Darn It?
Oh, it's just West Pennsylvania slang for God damn it.
Right. I mean, I figured that. And if you have bad vision from a distance, it looks like gold, damn it.
Hold on.
Yeah, actually, that's not bad. I mean, damn the gold.